This is Jeremy Penner, a man who enjoys weird games. He loves all of the bizarre corners of the internet, producing games that don't conform to the expectations of the industry or general consensus. Penner sees these odd games as incredibly important to discuss because, as he says, the history of the games industry is not the history of games. To Penner, discussing only the industrial history of games is incomplete, because it ignores an expansive world of games made by amateurs, hobbyists, and outsider artists. Games made outside of the main industry are still made by people, with their own goals, methods, and perspectives, and they're part of the history of games in their own important ways. Consider the Last Eichhof, a Swiss freeware game where you play as a bottle of the titular Eichhof, a brand of local Swiss beer. The game was created in protest of the increasing monopolization of the Swiss beer industry by larger brands. The Last Eichhof is a shmup where you pilot your Eichhof bottle to take on larger brands like Heineken, and eventually your own brain. It's certainly an odd title that heavily utilizes copyrighted and trademarked material. Obviously, there are all of the major brands who certainly don't appreciate being portrayed as villainous monopolizing forces, but the developers also threw in various bits of licensed music, like the Back to the Future theme. This flagrant disregard for copyright law allows the game to convey its commentary in a way that is only possible through independent shareware efforts. Penner was quite charmed by the Last Eichhof and other odd independent games, and he wanted to foster a sort of place that could produce more uncut creative gems like it. So, in 2007, Penner launched Glorious Trainwrecks, a forum and development community that aimed to foster the same set of unbridled artistic creativity of these strange but passionate games, encouraging people to harness the widespread adoption of the internet and the ever-increasing list of free tools that make game development more achievable for the average person than ever before. Glorious Trainwrecks' landing page brilliantly explains the site's creative ethos. Glorious Trainwrecks is about bringing back the spirit of postcardware, circa 1993. It's about throwing a bunch of random crap into your game and keeping whatever sticks. About bringing back a time when you didn't care so much about production values as much as ripping sound samples from your favorite television shows to use in your game, or animating pictures of yourself making goofy faces on your webcam. Where every ridiculous idea you had, you would just sit down and code. When you would make up a company name to legitimize dorking around on the computer with your friends. It is not about unfinished, unplayable games. If any part of a Glorious Trainwrecks is terrible, it is terrible in a way that is awesome. Together, you and I will bring the true spirit of indie gaming back. Yes, you. For this site is about nothing, if it is not about getting off your ass and creating. Wikipedia claims that they used to stage train wrecks, with empty trains of course, for the amusement of the general population. Would the world not be a better place if we brought this tradition back? It doesn't matter if you've got talent, so long as you've got gusto. Your game does not need to be coherent, but it does have to be finished. It is time to take the plunge into glory. Glorious Trainwrecks and the community it fostered absolutely lived up to this ethos. One look through the forum's archive will reveal a niche collective of people dedicated to making weird and interesting games, overcoming the constraints of development in imaginative and whimsical ways. At the time of recording, 4,817 games have been posted to Glorious Trainwrecks, spanning a wide range of genres, styles, and philosophies. As an example of some things that might be on the site, one pair of developers attempted to recreate the world of Pokémon Red and Blue from memory in RPG Maker 2000. Another created a Sokoban-style game about pushing around the letters on the Glorious Trainwrecks website. Someone else created a full open-world exploration game, complete with selectable avatars and turn-based deck-builder combat encounters, entirely within ZZT, a DOS game originally released in 1991. This really is only scratching the surface of the glorious Trainwrecks archive of fascinating games. One of the advantages of encouraging people to try strange new things, push their own boundaries, and attempt bold experimentation is that it can lead to projects that offer wild new spins on old ideas. Like other game development communities, Glorious Trainwrecks hosts periodic game jams, where people make games in a short amount of time within certain constraints. In 2012, Glorious Trainwrecks user Danny created a new jam format, the Secret Santa, spelled with a K as a nod to the click-and-play game engine. Participants in Secret Santa would submit a list of things they liked, or features they wanted to see in their game, and then someone else would receive that list and make a game with the requested ingredients. It's a unique development challenge, and the game jam was overall a success, becoming a yearly tradition for the site. During the 2018 Secret Santa, forum user Stranger made this request. For Clickmas, I would like an anti-climbing game, where you start at the top and must climb down. I'd really like for the path down to be unmarked, not even clear if it's possible to get down, or there to be many paths that become extremely difficult, or impossible. Also, it doesn't need to be an actual mountain that I'm descending. I'm going to leave it at that so as to keep the possibilities open for you, Santa. This request would be served up to Marek Kapolka, known on the forum as MKA Polk, who would deliver Frog Clan official server 24/7 ZK map for Stranger. This is my favorite game on Glorious Trainwrecks. ZK map, on account of its anti-climbing game roots, makes Descent the core of its experience, making a great case study in this fascinating gameplay dynamic. Because of gravity, going down in games is usually quite easy. Doing so safely is the tricky part. Some games play with downward motion in interesting ways, such as using it to thrust you into unsafe situations, limiting options for upward movement, or adding fall damage, a mechanic that asks players to fall in controlled ways instead of barreling forward with the unbridled assistance of gravity. MKA Polk uses this last approach. ZK Map is an incredibly simple game. You start at the top of a level, and you have to find a way to the bottom. Of course, your descent is complicated by the existence of gravity and fall damage. As you can see, falling in this game is absolutely brutal if you aren't careful. If players do happen to take damage, they can eat food from their stash to regain some of their health. The start of a level always gives the player some food for their journey, but there are additional caches hidden throughout the level. That is the whole game. It's incredibly simple on paper, but like all great simple games, these few elements overlap and interact to produce a whole greater than the sum of its parts. One of the reasons why ZK Map is so compelling can be found in the subtleties of its movement. There's depth to something as simple as jumping that makes the process of getting from point A to point B engaging. Movement in this game was inspired by the weird, cheesable movement tech found throughout gaming. In fact, the game's tutorial introduces the player to strafe jumping, a mechanic which originated as a Quake bug that the developers found endearing, and gradually made its way into a slew of other games. Essentially, by holding down the left or right keys and moving the mouse, players can move through the air faster than they normally could, allowing them to jump further and clear larger gaps. While strafing is useful for more lateral movement, it can only do so much to slow your descent. Wall bouncing is your tool for vertical movement, slowing vertical speed and making deadly falls survivable. Combining these two techniques, you can move through levels in surprising ways that reward players who explore the absolute limits of their toolset. The movement in this game evokes the same sort of feeling engendered by other games with exploitable movement. The sort that makes you wonder, can I cheese my way up that cliff? Exploring the uncertain edges of movement is extremely compelling, in part because I think there's a certain tension in pushing against the limits of a game's toolset. If you spend a decent amount of time playing games, then you'll develop a sense for what developers generally intend players to do. However, the toolsets that players have can often be used in surprising and unique ways. At the edges of possibility is a land of cheese, of bold, risky plays, where it's generally unclear if certain strategies are even possible. As me and my friend Lamhoot have argued before, tension is produced from uncertainty, from situations where you genuinely can't tell what the outcome is until a conclusion is reached. Personally, I would argue that these edge-case cheesable movements are so compelling to players because we don't fully know what is and isn't possible, and pulling off bizarre tricks to bypass obstacles in novel ways is satisfying and engaging because of tension. ZK Map focuses on exactly this sort of movement tech throughout the design of its levels. As you've likely noticed, its levels are spiraling spires of surrealism. This isn't surprising considering that MKA Polk's games often employ weird 3D spaces with strange textures and quirky inhabitants. MKA Polk's games span a broad range of styles, but when I think of MKA Polk's games, surreal 3D spaces often spring to mind. Aesthetically, I love the presentation of ZK Map. The game's levels are a profound divorce from the confines of reality, eschewing both the pretense of architectural sense and of natural realism. Its structures are patently artificial masses, supported by nothing, yet suspended gracefully across the sky. One thing I like about the levels is that while the geometry is chaotic, there is a sort of pattern to it, where similar elements will come together to create distinct, compartmentalized sections. This differentiation helps give the level a contrast and prevents it from feeling like a vague and formless oatmeal of general sameness. These distinct sections also afford differentiated opportunities for the player, requiring different approaches. Playing ZK Map is a really explorative experience because there's no obvious author-intended path to the bottom, which sets it apart from most other platformers. A lot of other platformer level design generally focuses on guiding the player. As many others have noted, Mario uses coins to show players where they should jump, and that design technique has since been used widely across the genre. Generally, platformers primarily challenge players on their execution skills. It's not that hard to figure out how a given screen in Celeste is meant to be cleared. The hard part is actually executing the actions needed to do so. Conversely, ZK Map is all about routing. There is no clear and obvious path forward, but the levels are sprawling and complex, offering a myriad of potential routes. This approach really plays well with the game's food system. Bushes and crates are sources of useful healing items. With an excess of food, the player is capable of traversing more paths because they can spend their health as a resource to traverse costly paths, and this can open them up to interesting new routes. However, getting that food requires players to pay attention to what is below them, and for them to plan accordingly. It's a great incentive for making tricky experimental jumps, and it adds a lot of decision-making to this platforming experience. Does the player risk going through a difficult and potentially costly path to get more food? Or do they take a safer route that doesn't have any immediate food? Often, I would take my time to survey my surroundings and assess my situation, as if I was an actual climber trying to descend a slope. Getting from one point to another, horizontally or vertically, is definitely not a trivial feat. In ZK Map, fall damage is relentless to the reckless. If I were to just barrel forward, taking the first and most obvious path I saw, I would quickly die. Instead, I found myself carefully surveying the environment, wondering if certain jumps were possible, and experimenting. There have been many times across my several playthroughs where I've seen a jump that looked impossible, but I found some cheesy approach that brought it into the realm of viability. This might sound tedious if you haven't played the game before, because risking all of your progress on a jump that will probably kill you can be scary. And if you had to beat a level with only a single life, it would encourage only the most conservative and cautious style of play. Fortunately, the game actually has an incredibly lenient checkpoint system. At any time the player isn't moving, they can update their spawn position. It costs nothing to do so, and lets players attempt tricky jumps as many times as they would like. In practice, the mechanic is a slightly more restrictive version of the quick saving found in old-school RPGs and first-person shooters, which feels appropriate considering how much ZK Map draws on those games for its visual identity and movement mechanics. This gracious respawning system actually does a lot to encourage players to go for riskier jumps. Deaths might only cost a few seconds, so trying a difficult, potentially impossible jump won't be a run-ender. Ultimately, ZK Map is at its best when you're pushing at the edges of what is possible, prodding to find weird, cheesy paths forward. Across my playthroughs of this game, I've repeatedly found myself attempting jumps that I wasn't sure were entirely possible, but I kept trying over and over again, until I finally found the one specific leap I could make that safely got me from point A to point B, in a stylish, cheesy, and satisfying manner. If the respawn system wasn't so lenient, I doubt I would be attempting this sort of jump. With that being said, it is still worth exercising a bit of caution with the checkpoint system, because you don't want to trap yourself in an unwinnable position. Even if you make a tricky jump, it's worth it to look around from your new vantage point to make sure that you have a viable path forward before committing to your new checkpoint. This helps give a bit more depth and nuance to placing checkpoints, once again encouraging a contemplative and thoughtful approach. ZK Map is simple in concept, surreal in execution, and a fascinating curiosity. Every few months, I find myself returning to the game to give its levels another run. Despite playing these levels several times, new runs still feel fresh because each time I end up exploring completely new paths down these suspended blocky structures. In many ways, ZK Map is the perfect embodiment of the glorious Trainwrecks ethos. Like a lot of the games on the site, it's really weird, but the interesting sort of weird that so strongly breaks the bounds of convention that it reveals a whole new way of thinking about the world. While it's theoretically possible that something like ZK Map could have come from somewhere else, I can't deny that the creative ethos of Glorious Trainwrecks helped birth this game. I have never played anything quite like it. Its focus on slow, calculated, cheesy descent sets it apart from other high-octane games about barreling downwards, and for that I can't help but love the game. It's short and completely free to play. I recommend heading over to Glorious Trainwrecks and giving it a shot. And maybe while you are there, take a look at some of the other games on the site. It's filled with all sorts of weird and simple games, but it is precisely that sort of thing that sparks my own imagination about what is possible with game design. Some people might bounce off ZK Map, but for others, it might be the first step of many down into the twisting, surreal world of Glorious Trainwrecks.